Opportunity to compare notes with the envoy and to again think through how we can support the Syrian people in this time of both opportunity but also a real challenge.
New this morning, Secretary of State Blinken is in Jordan, part of his trip to the Middle East. Blinken is meeting with the UN envoy to Syria and showing optimism about the country's future. Earlier this week, rebel groups removed Syrian president, now former president, Bashar al-Assad, ending the country's 13-year-long civil war. After Assad's ouster, missing American traveler Travis Timmerman was found outside of Damascus. Timmerman had been imprisoned by the Assad regime for months. Joining us now is former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, John Brennan. He's an MSNBC national security analyst.
Director Brennan, good morning to you. Can you give us a sense of what it is that Secretary Blinken is looking to accomplish on this trip?
Well, I think Secretary Blinken is trying to have a dialogue with the foreign ministers of the regional states because there's great concern about what's happening inside of Syria and basically the takeover of the government in the country by this Islamist coalition, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group, HTS. And so I think there are concerns about the reverberations that this upheaval in Syria can have in the region overall. So I think Tony Blinken is trying to make sure that we have this dialogue with these Arab foreign ministers to understand exactly what they're doing to try to contain the violence inside of Syria and to do what they can to help rebuild the country, because the country, after 14 years or so of civil war, has been really, destroyed. Much of the infrastructure, the roads, the educational system, and also the economy is in shambles. So the Syrian people and the new Syrian government is going to need outside assistance, and that's where I think the United States really can play a role.
So, Director, while that's going on, the sort of the forward-facing efforts by the Secretary of State and our allies in the region, the backstory is the drama around the release or the finding of Americans who have been held by Assad. You have, Blinken speaking on American journalist Austin Tice. Let's take a listen here for that.
No update on Austin Tice except to say that every single day we are working to find him and to bring him home, making sure that the word is out to everyone that this is a priority for the United States.
Mr. Tice was an American journalist who's been missing for 12 years inside Assad's regime. How does that storyline impact what the Secretary talks about in those meetings? How is that integrated into the conversation as the new leadership is standing up, with whomever that may be, the efforts maybe by others in the region who can help in finding Mr. Tice and any other Americans who are there?
Well, the Assad regime for many years has been well known to be involved in torture and incarceration and killing of its citizens, not just Syrian citizens, but others as well. So I'm sure some of those regional countries are also interested in trying to make sure that their citizens are going to be secure and safe during this period of great change and even chaos. I'm hoping that Austin Tice is still alive. I met with his parents a number of times when I was in the government. They have had an unending search for him, but we really don't know whether or not he is still alive. He was detained so many years ago, and sort of the trail went cold. But I think what Secretary Blinken is going to try to do is to not only help in terms of any type of U.S. citizens that may be in Syria and have been either detained, incarcerated, or are just trying to find their way home, but also talking to these other ministers about what we can collectively do to try to tamp down the violence, the bloodshed, the upheaval that's been going on in Syria for so many years.
You know, Director Brennan, as you say this, I'm struck by the fact that Secretary Blinken is meeting with, essentially, he's trying to ensure a united front with our Arab and Turkish allies. And at the same time, Jake Sullivan, the president's national security advisor, has been dispatched to Israel. Some folks might say, well, why is he going to Israel? Well, the Israeli government has the defense minister, and this is according to we've got many reports that the defense minister in Israel has ordered the military to establish what he called a sterile defense zone in southern Syria, and that Israel's Navy has destroyed Syria's military fleet. Many things are happening at the same time, and I'm just wondering about this 1-2 punch, essentially, with Secretary Blinken, again, trying to establish this united front with our Arab allies and Turkish allies. And then, Jake Sullivan going over to Israel to talk to his counterparts, presumably Prime Minister Netanyahu, to say, hey, meanwhile, everybody knows that these folks are on the way out. And Donald Trump is coming in, and he said, let Syria work out itself. Because that's what he said, essentially. He said, we don't need to get engaged and get involved.
Well, it's important during this period of transition in the United States from one president to the next that there's going to be continued engagement by the outgoing administration, because the situation in the Middle East obviously is quite dynamic, and it has the potential to really explode even more than it has. Syria's military for many years has been a real concern to the Israelis, which is why the Israelis have carried out a number of strikes against Syrian targets, the Navy. But there is chemical weapon stockpiles still inside of Syria that they're trying to identify and destroy. So there's just a lot of concern in the area. Syria plays a major role in Lebanon. It plays a major role as far as supports the Palestinian cause. So again, there's just a lot of different complex issues and challenges that I think all the players right now are trying to understand better and see if they can get a handle on.
And keep it in a contained.
Exactly.
Director Brennan, that's the complexity of the Middle East. We also have the complexity of what is unfolding in Ukraine. We had some reporting this Friday that the Trump team is in talks with President Biden and Ukrainian officials about ending the war with Russia. Let me read you some of that. Despite Trump's promises to end the war quickly, it remains unclear whether he can persuade Russian President Vladimir Putin to halt the fighting as Moscow's forces gain ground in eastern Ukraine. It is also not clear if Trump's team has communicated with Putin's government about Ukraine, and if so, what has been conveyed by either side? Your thoughts, sir?
Well, it's clear that the Trump administration, I think, is going to take a different policy tack than the Biden administration has. And Donald Trump clearly has indicated that he wants to pull back from the amount of support, U.S. military and economic and financial support to Ukraine. He has made these claims that he can end the war in one day. Well, that is ludicrous. That's not going to happen. But I'm pretty sure that the members of the incoming Trump administration are engaged in talks with the Russians, with the Ukrainians and others. And I'm hoping that we're still going to provide support to Ukraine, because what we can't do is to allow Putin to prevail inside of Ukraine, because it's going to send very ominous signals to Europe and to the rest of the world that the United States is pulling back from its responsibilities to prevent these types of continued encroachment by Russia into Ukraine and potentially other areas of Europe.
Staying on that point, how do you see, because Trump believes in his head, because that's where a lot of this takes place, because it's not based in reality, that they want to leverage, conflict with Iran, the tensions with Iran against the next steps that need to be taken in Ukraine. Can something like that happen? Trump, says, regarding possible war with Iran, anything can happen. I don't know what the hell that means. There's got to be some fundamental policy that drives how this country, our country, approaches both of these very, very dangerous situations.
Yes, and where is Ukraine in the conversation?
Yeah.
How in the world is the United States out here trying to negotiate a way on behalf of Ukraine without the Ukrainians at the table?
Right.
Well, I think it's critically important that the Ukrainians be at the table because, as we recall, what happened in Afghanistan is that the previous Trump administration negotiated a withdrawal without the Afghan officials actually participating in those talks inside of Doha. So there's a lot of connectedness between what's going on in the Middle East as well as what's going on in Ukraine. We have Russia and Iran that have really improved their relationship. Iran is providing drone support to the Russians. And so also we see the North Koreans working with the Russians on Ukraine. So there's just a lot of intricacies here in this international environment that the Trump administration really needs to have a better handle on and understand exactly how you can, in fact, engage in these areas in a productive, constructive way.
Well, they could probably get that handled if Donald Trump wasn't the one making the decision here or the call.